before we get into it, I got to tell a story because I told Eli that I would tell the story. So if you don't know, today's Eli's birthday. So he's going to go back and watch this, he says, on YouTube. So well, you don't have to sing him happy birthday, Connor. Well, you can if you'd like. I mean, would you like to sing him happy birthday?
I don't like to do things for attention. I'm doing this for your son.
Okay. I was going to say, I hope so, because if you notice the title of the lesson tonight, it's on pride. So, you know, this is not to exalt yourself, I hope. So, okay. Are you going to sing it, or are you just saying you're going to sing it?
I mean, am I really going to do it myself?
I think everybody else will join in if you start. Connor doesn't want to be on video. He's afraid people see him in a different way. This is for real.
How old is he?
Eli is 11 years old.
Happy 11th birthday from Common Grounds to you.
Yes.
Happy birthday to you.
Oh, beautiful.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Eli. Happy birthday to you. I'm so sorry.
Hey, good job, kids. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Now for the story.
You don't remember what age still do.
Now for the story. So, 11 years ago today, about this time, I guess about 7 o'clock, right? So we were about 2.5 hours from being born, I guess, at this point. We were still at Riggin at this point. We were living in Riggin. And my wife was telling me for about the last 2 hours that she felt like she needed to go to the hospital. She felt like the baby was coming. And in my own ignorance and pride, I believed that I was smarter than her and the doctor, and I convinced her that we were not going to leave until the contractions were 5 minutes apart for at least 1 hour. 1 hour straight. Because that's what the doctor told me to do, and I was going to be smart. I'm going to do what the doctor said. I mean, it's a long way from Riggin to Jackson. That's like a 45, 50-minute drive. So I just kind of lollygagged around and floated around and did all that. Well, they got 5 minutes apart for about 30 minutes. And she looked at me and said, either you're going to take me or I'm going to drive myself. And I said, well, all right. And I got mad and huffy and said, we'll go, I guess. And we got in the car and took off driving. And before we got there, they were about a minute apart. And we pulled into the hospital. I got out at the front door, left the doors open and the emergency flashers on, and just left my car sitting there running with the keys in it. Wheeled her in. They put her in a wheelchair, and some guy that she's known for years was the man pushing her in the wheelchair. And I'll never forget the look on his face. It looked like he had seen a ghost. He was scared to death because she was about to have the baby in the wheelchair. And we got in the room. They threw her up on the table. And she still had her Bruce Pearl Tennessee shirt on, Tennessee Pearl. It was a clam that had a pearl in it because it was just awesome, you know, this sporting Bruce Pearl. And 4 minutes later, Eli came out. She never got an IV. She never got anything. And she'll never let me forget that sometimes maybe she's smarter than I am. That's hard to believe, I know, but sometimes she's smarter than me. But
It was not a pleasant ride to Jackson.
it was the scariest ride I believe I've ever had in my whole life. Because I really was afraid I was going to have to deliver the baby in the car. I never did. My parents showed up and saw it sitting there with the doors open and said, something's wrong. And they saw it out there.
You got me in the wheelchair. I said, are you not going to shut the car off? And you ran out.
I just left it there.
But you left the car.
I left the car there. I turned it off, but I left it there. So they ended up moving the car. So my mom was actually going to be in the delivery room, but that didn't pan out. So because obviously it was there. And I still say today that that's why Eli is so impatient over everything, because you know he was impatient when he was born, and he's still impatient today. But he's a good kid. So he's 11 years old. Didn't really have much to go with what we're doing tonight, but it's a pretty good story for the fact that it's his birthday. But it was kind of prideful because I, in my own arrogance, felt like I knew more than the doctor did, and felt like I knew more than my wife did, who was actually having the baby. I wasn't having the baby, but I felt like I knew better than she did. But anyway, I didn't make that same mistake with Evan. I made that mistake with Eli, not with Evan. So it's all good. Anyway, we will get on to our lesson now. So tonight we're talking about pride. The title is Exalted to be Humbled. To kind of recap the last couple of weeks, we've started this new End of Me series. Ryan kicked it off 2 weeks ago. And then last week we had a pretty deep lesson on mourning, which was, I'm glad he taught it because it was extremely deep and an extremely tough topic to talk about, but a true topic. And tonight, while it is a little bit different, it's still something tonight that is pretty convicting to all of us, and that's our pride. And what happens when your pride gets in the way of actually living the way you're supposed to live. So we've got a few different points we're going to go through tonight. I'm going to kind of go through 3 points of what pride can do to you, and then 3 points of maybe how you can kind of get away from that. But this whole series reminds me a lot of an episode of one of my favorite TV shows of all time, Seinfeld. Y'all ever heard of Seinfeld? Anybody ever heard of that? Okay. If you've never seen it, you should watch it. And if you don't think it's the best TV show ever, then something's wrong with you. But that's okay. Okay, well, Scary Jones. Wow. Bold strategy there, Scary. But anyway, there's an episode in Seinfeld where you've got Elaine, and she's best friends with Jerry and George and Kramer. Jerry was her old boyfriend, and now they're just friends. And George is Jerry's friend, and he's whiny and lies a lot, and just a terrible guy. And then Kramer, he's the neighbor that just comes over there and mooches everything off. Well, in one episode, she meets another guy by the name of Kevin, who's exactly the opposite of Jerry. He's nice, he's personable, where Jerry's aloof and condescending. And she goes over to his apartment. His apartment is exactly the same as Jerry's, except for it's in reverse. So everything that was on the left in Jerry's is on the right in this guy's apartment. And she meets his friend who's sitting on the couch, and his name's Gene. And unlike George, Gene is very generous. Gene's a very good guy. He works hard, he's very well read, he's very smart. And then he's got a neighbor across the hall. His name's Feldman. Whereas Jerry's neighbor's Kramer, his neighbor's Feldman. And Feldman is not a mooch. He brings groceries over. He doesn't take things from Jerry, he brings them to it. And she realizes that she's in a bizarro world. She's in the exact opposite of the world that she used to live in. And it reminds me a lot of this passage of Scripture from Matthew 5:5, which states, and if I had my sheet, I could read it. But I don't have my sheet. My bad. Which states, "Blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the earth." Now, in our worldly view, that doesn't make any sense, does it? Because in our world, the humble are not the ones that earn anything. Your CEOs, your celebrities, your reality TV stars, your musicians, those are the people that look like, by worldly standards, that are actually achieving the greatness, right? But what Jesus is saying is that in order for you to inherit the earth, you have to be humble, which is the exact opposite of what the world tells you to do. So just like Elaine entered a bizarro world, it's almost like we have to enter into a different world as we go forward every day, because we're entering a world that is completely different than what worldly standards actually say. We're going in a different direction completely. And if we ever want to reach the end of ourselves and start moving forward as a true disciple of Jesus Christ, the only way we can do that is turn our eyes completely away from the world and turn our eyes back to what Jesus' teachings are. So tonight we're going to be talking about, in Luke chapter 18, about 2 different people. A Pharisee, who, if we know anything about the parables, the Pharisees are always kind of the antagonists in all the stories. They're the righteous people that think they've got it all together but really don't. And the tax collector, who is the lowest of the low. And we're going to see Jesus kind of tell us which one of those actually is being exalted the most when we're in here. So I'm going to read the scripture here, and then we'll kind of talk about it just a little bit. So starting in Luke chapter 18, in verse 9, He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and looked down on everyone else. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee was standing and praying like this about himself: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, greedy, unrighteous, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of everything I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but kept striking his chest and saying, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you this one went down to his house justified rather than the other, because everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. So, when we read this, I'm sure a lot of you are probably thinking that obviously the Pharisee is the bad guy in this story, right? The Pharisee is the one that thinks he's got it all together. He's exalting himself. He's smarter than everybody else. He knows more than everybody else. He's so much better than the lowly tax collector or the greedy or all these different things. But what we forget sometimes is we've all got a little Pharisee in our own life. We've all got pride in our own life, and we all struggle with pride. In fact, it's something that I've struggled with in my own life. When I was a kid, and I don't like to talk about this much because it's not very endearing to me, but my mom, back when I was younger, coming to my teenage years, she called me Tootie. Do y'all know why she called me that? Because I like to toot my own horn a lot. I like to talk about myself quite often. And I like to talk about how great I was at everything or how awesome I was at doing things. She called me that quite a bit. Yeah. So, you got something to say there? You whispering around? Yeah, you were doing some whispering there. I was afraid you were going to have something to say. But that's what she called me, because I was one of these people that was more interested in proclaiming about how great I was, or how great I was doing things, or how great I was going about things, as opposed to living the life of a humble person, of somebody that was just going out and doing things but not expecting any accolades or anything like that. And I'm sure there's certain times that we've all had those thoughts in our heads like, hey, I'm pretty good at this, or I'm pretty well at this particular thing, or I'm pretty smart when it comes to this, or I don't need help doing this. And what happens is when that pride starts to build up in us, it actually starts taking away from our relationship and our walk with Jesus and actually what we're supposed to do. So tonight we're going to see 3 different things first about what our pride does to us, and then we're going to see maybe some ways that we can humble ourselves and get away from that. And the first thing we see is your pride makes you defensive. Your pride makes you defensive. Another word for defensive is salty. Okay, that's true. Okay, it's true. Proverbs 13:10 says, arrogance leads to nothing but strife, but wisdom is gained by those who take advice. So have you ever heard anyone say, particularly maybe when someone's come to them in love, or maybe offered a thought to them that was different from them, how dare can you say that to me? You know, what right do you have to say that to me? What right do you have to criticize me, or to almost meet that with an arrogance or a smudgeness, I guess you would call it. Smugness. Yes, that sounds more accurate, doesn't it, honey? My wife, you know, she's an expert when it comes to vocabulary, so we'll leave it at that. Well, you are. It's fine. Anyway, so we've all seen that. We've all got that ability, right? When people come to us and we feel like we're in the right and we know what is supposed to be going on, or we know what we're supposed to be doing, that what do? We put our defenses up, right? We kind of put those walls up like, hey, I don't need to hear what you've got to say because I already know. I know because I've got the knowledge. I know because I've already went through this, or I've went around this, or I've done something in these lanes. And what happens when we do that is it actually eliminates the ability for people to actually speak truth into our life. If you're sitting here tonight and you don't have anybody speaking truth into your life, or you're not able to take any criticism, or you're not able to take any real truth in you, most of the time it's probably because somebody's trying to offer you that and you've ignored it and they won't come to you anymore. It's not because you became this righteous person that's living right. It's because you've deflected your defenses against someone else so much that they just have quit trying to offer you the truth in your life. And then when that happens, we start to build ourselves up, thinking that in our own self and our own pride that we are so far ahead of everyone else that's why no one will come and tell us the truth, when it's really not the case. It's the same case with the Pharisee right here. If you notice, the very first thing he says as he's thanking God is he's almost giving God a backhanded compliment. He's thanking Him, but he's thanking Him because He created him to be so awesome, to be so much better than everybody else. And he's stepping over all of the people that are below him. And then he sees the tax collector over here, and he just throws him kind of in there under the bus, being like, and I am so much better. Thank you that I have become so much better than everyone else. Now, do you think if anybody would have came to that Pharisee at that point, that he would have accepted any criticism or anything that they told him? Probably not. Because he felt like his knowledge was so good that he had nothing to gain from hearing from anybody else. And when you build yourself up in that kind of pride, you limit yourself on what you can actually accomplish in your walk with Christ. You limit what you can actually go out and do because your pride has overtaken who you are. And just like your pride makes you defensive, your pride also keeps you defeated. So I'm going to use one here that's a little bit tough sometimes and a little bit hard to figure, but I look at this sometimes, maybe if you're in an argument with someone, maybe you're in an argument with a family member, maybe you're in an argument with your friends, maybe you're in an argument with a co-worker or something like that, and you make the decision that you are so right that there's no way you could possibly be wrong. And you build that up in your prideful sin to the point where instead of actually doing what you're supposed to do and actually going to that person in love or in mercy, you build it up and decide, hey, you know what? I'm in the right here. They're in the wrong. If they want to come to me, they can come to me. But in myself and in my pride, there's no way that I could be wrong. There's no way that I could ever not be what I think that I'm going to be. So you can't even humble yourself enough to say, hey, you know what? I don't really know who's right or who's wrong in this situation, but at the same time, we just need to move forward and get off of it and move to something else. And that pride, unfortunately, keeps you defeated. I've known of people that have ruined relationships with people they've known for 20 or 30 years, all because of one simple argument. And they're too prideful to admit that maybe, just maybe, they were just a little bit wrong. They were too prideful to admit that maybe there was some blame to go around to all parties. But instead of just acknowledging that and accepting that and going to that person to actually seek an apology or to offer an apology, they just hold it all in. And they hold that in their pride, and it ends up defeating them. You end up walking through life as a defeated person. You end up walking through life as somebody that's unable to do anything, unable to go out, unable to actually be somebody. Or you offer a backhanded apology, maybe a I'm sorry, but apology, which is not an apology at all. It's basically you saying, I'm going to say I'm sorry, but I'm only going to say that because I'm going to get my 2 cents in of why I was actually right, and I'm just trying to get this out of the way. You see, that's another area where your pride becomes so just a fence blocking you from being able to actually go out and live the life that Christ has laid down for you. When you can't get away from your own pride just enough to even walk to somebody and humbly say, hey, you know what we've had here is an argument, we've had a disagreement, but I can't live in that defeat. I can't live in that struggle anymore. I need to come to you and we need to make this right. And you can't do it because your pride, it just holds on to you so tight and you just can't let it go. And that's, when we look back at the story, the same thing that the Pharisee has here, and that's what Jesus is trying to tell people when he's at the Sermon on the Mount. When you hold on to that pride, when you hold on to that feeling that you are always right, you forget that you are actually not right. The only way you're right is if you're actually right with Jesus. And the only thing that He's telling you to do is that you have to humble yourself to come to Him to be exalted. You have to humble yourself, and that means to humble yourself to everybody that you come with, everybody that you talk to, and every relationship that you have. And the third thing we see that pride does is it destroys your joy. Destroys your joy. I've got a few quick hitters here on some things that are just stealers of your joy that all come back to your own pride and your own self. So let's say you look at this one. How about, well, it's not fair. Well, it's not fair that this person gets more at their job than I get, or this person makes more money than I make, or this person has a nicer car, or this person doesn't have this struggle, or this person doesn't have that struggle. Or you continuously look or obsess about the opinions of others, what others think of you. It becomes an obsession of yours that you can't actually carry on in life without knowing that people look at you in a certain light or a certain light ahead or above everyone else. You seek approval in the world. You seek approval from other people. Your anger at someone when they're doing well, and then you're secretly hoping that they fail. And then you revel in the fact that they fail because it makes you feel better because you felt like they were ahead of you and now they've fallen a little bit. Now in yourself and in your pride, you feel better about yourself because of it. All of these different things and all of these different opinions that I'm offering you are all ways that our pride just destroys our joy in life. Because we're seeking the approval of everyone except for the only person whose approval really matters. And that's Jesus. That's the only approval that we should seek. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride comes before destruction, and an arrogant spirit before a fall." I love Proverbs because it just keeps giving us these great truths over and over and over about what our pride does to us if we let it take hold of us instead of reveling in the truth and taking the truth of what God's told us to do and placing all that away from us and taking that away and allowing that to come in and take that pride away from us and push it into a different direction. So what does it mean to be humble? What does it mean to you to be humble? What does that mean? Anybody? No right or wrong answer here. Nobody? Wow. Exciting bunch. Fired up.
Think of yourself last, I think.
Sure. That's a good point. Humble doesn't mean that you have to be just meek and in the corner. Sometimes people think that's what it means. Sometimes people think that to be humble, you have to try to portray a certain thing. You'll see people post on social media, I just got back from a big vacation. I'm so exhausted. Well, that's a humble brag is what it is, okay? They're using the word exhausted to make you think they're being humble when really they're just bragging about the fact that they had a big week-long vacation, You'll see people post on there, about their kids. Oh, my kids made straight A's this time. Must be doing something right. Well, that's a humble brag. You're trying to be humble, but you're really just wanting to brag about how great your kids are, right? All right, that's not what I'm talking about when I'm being humble. What Ryan said is an accurate definition of what it truly means to be humble. That means putting others before yourself and putting the needs of others up ahead of you. So how do you humble yourself? Well, here's a couple of ways. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. There's plenty of other ways you can humble yourself, plenty of other ways you can go about this. But these are just a few things that you can do. And the first thing is you humble yourself by asking for help. Asking for help. The first problem you see with the Pharisee is what does he use continuously in all of these different statements? I do this, I give this, I'm not this, I is all he keeps talking about. So basically what he's saying is he doesn't need the help of God. He doesn't need the help of anybody else. He doesn't need the help of his friends. He doesn't need the help of anyone else. All he needs is himself because he's so awesome and so great that no one else could possibly help him. But the tax collector comes out And all he says is one thing: God, have mercy on me, a sinner. He understands that he is nothing without God, and he can do nothing and accomplish nothing unless God actually ordains it. So the first thing you see is that humbling yourself by asking for help. The second thing you see is humble yourself by helping others. And this is one that I really feel really strongly about. In Philippians 2:3 says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourself." In the book, The End of Me, he tells a story that I thought was very fitting for this. It was a story of a tightrope walker. This is someone that I don't know how you figure out that you can walk a tightrope. I don't know where you come up with that, where it is, but this guy becomes the greatest tightrope walker in the world. He walks across Niagara Falls on a tightrope. All right. And then he walks across the Grand Canyon on a tightrope. You know, no rope holding him together, no net underneath. I mean, if he falls, he's dead. And he's, 1 centimeter off to the left or right, and he's done. And he knows it. But he accomplishes all this, and he draws these great crowds, and people come out to see him, and they applaud for him, and they're just he's so awesome, he's just so great. And he's a devout Christian, and he is extremely humble in the way he goes about. So after he walked over the Grand Canyon, he had attracted thousands of people to come out and see him. And when it was all said and done, there was a reporter there, and he caught up with him after the walk, and he asked him, he said, "How, in your faith, how do you stay so humble? With so many people applauding for you, so many people telling you how great you are, so many people telling you how wonderful what you're doing is, how do you stay so humble?" And he said, "Well, whenever everyone leaves," he said, "I don't go and get in a car and leave. I don't go get on a plane and leave." He said, "I go around and I spend the next 3 hours picking up the trash and cleaning up the area where all these people were at." And he said, "And during that 3 hours, I'm praying to God continuously that He allowed me the opportunity to do that, but He's also allowed me to be humble enough to go around and still pick up the trash after everybody left." I cannot tell you the amount of events we've had and the amount of times we've went out and put on some great events at the church. I'm sure Connor can attest to this through the Methodist Church. I'm sure if you've been to another church, you can attest to this. And we've put on some awesome events and some great things. And people have attended, and they've applauded. They've applauded Ryan. They've applauded anybody else. And there's a lot of people that will come to these events, and they'll put on the T-shirt, and they'll stand in the front, and they'll shake everybody's hand. And the minute the event's over, they walk out the door. They got the glory. Everybody saw them, but they didn't care anything about sticking around and actually doing what it took to actually finish up after the event. To pick everything back up, put everything back into place, to put everything back into order. You see, those people were more interested in making sure everybody saw them there, making sure that everybody knew that they were part of it, making sure everybody knew that they were part of the event, but they weren't actually interested in humbling themselves to actually help see it to the end. So if you're interested in knowing how to humble yourself, maybe that's the first thing you can do, is learn that helping others will carry you a lot further than ever worrying about helping yourself. And letting others people be the first in the line and you be the last in the line, or sticking around after all the people that are looking for the glory or seek the glory have left, to stand there and make sure that everything else that no one else wants to do is taken care of. That's another way you can humble yourself, and humble yourself to what Jesus is calling us to do. And third, you can humble yourself by honoring who God is. Humbling yourself by honoring who God is. Philippians 2 continues in verses 6 through 8. It says, "Who, existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. Instead, He emptied Himself by assuming the form of a servant, taking on the likeness of humanity, and when He had come as man, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to death on the cross." So if you ever need the example of what humbling yourself actually looks like, it's pretty simple to find, and it's pretty simple to see. Jesus was sitting on the throne, in heaven, the only perfect place there is to live in the world, living the perfect life. And he came out from there into a world that was just not very good. It was dirty, it was messy, it was sad, it was prideful, it was sinful. And he came down from heaven for one thing and one thing only, and that was to serve others and to humbly take all of that pain and put it on his back so that we might be able to live and move forward. So if Jesus can come down from all of that for one goal and for one thing, which was to save us, how can we not humble ourselves each and every day to go forward and live in the same way that he lived? How can we not walk each day taking away our pride because we really didn't do anything? And anything that we accomplish really is not accomplished because of anything that we have or anything that we're really good at. It's because of only the blessings that God has given to us. And so many times we see people who will come to know Christ and who will get saved and who will think, that's it. I'm saved. I'm going to read the Bible a little bit. I'm going to kind of hang out, but that's all I'm going to do. And all these blessings in their life will happen, and they'll be just like the Pharisee. And they'll just talk about how great they are and how wonderful they are and how well they're maintaining themselves. And they'll miss the entire point of what it actually means to truly follow Jesus. And when you truly follow Jesus, your identity changes from you to him. And you no longer identify as yourself. You identify as a follower of Jesus. And whatever his plan for your life is and whatever he's called you to do is what you do, whether you want to do it or not. Now that's difficult to hear, and I understand that's difficult in this worldly fashion that we live in to understand, but it's the truth. And if we want to come to the end of ourselves and actually walk in the truth and the newness of Jesus and his message, the first place that we have to look is to take ourselves humbly down to where we are just a servant of him, and that anytime those prideful thoughts come together or come into us or build up inside of us or anything else, we have to turn away from that and reflect that back to him. So the question I've got at the bottom is, what can I do to humble myself? Now, I'm not asking for anyone to answer this unless you just really feel convicted to answer it. If you do, I'm all for you. What I'm putting this down for is that something I want you to think about tonight, through the week, as we go forward, is what area in my life. Now, if you're saying I don't have an area in my life I can humble myself, well then you need to go back and read it all, because you have a lot of areas in yourself. If you already believe that there's not an area where you could humble yourself a little bit more, then you may be missing the point here. Because all of us, truthfully, probably have something in our lives that we know we need to humble ourselves and need to take that away. Some type of prideful arrogance or something that we have there. So think about that. Consider that. Pray over that here as we go forward over the next little bit.